Hi, everybody. I'm Matt.
And I'm Steve.
And this is Marvel Reread Club.
So, yeah, last episode was a little bit sprawling. We were not as disciplined with how we talked about these books as we usually try to be, or at least let me put it this way. I was not, and I'm the one editing it, and I'm still in the middle of editing it right now, and I'm going to try to be a little bit more disciplined this time.
Last episode, we had special guest Dan McCoy of the Flophouse podcast, and he was wonderful. If, heaven forbid, you are listening to these in backwards order, then you are in for a treat when you get to our next episode. Dan was, as you would expect, a very funny and delightful guest. He chose 4 books of the 9 books in July 1967, and now we are going to do the rest of them. We're going to do the other 5 books without a guest. And then I think we'll have another special guest next month for both halves of the month. Another superstar. Should we go ahead and jump in with these 5 books? We got a lot of books to get through, Steve.
Yes, we do.
Let's go ahead and do Fantastic Four number 64, The Century Sinister. So Lee and Kirby's imagination, I don't know, maybe I should say Kirby and Lee's imagination has been firing on all cylinders for so long in this book. And now we have a book that is less legendary as the books around it, even though it introduces the amazing alien race, the Kree, who will go on to spawn movies and TV shows and so much in the Marvel Universe. Huge storylines, the 2 Kree Skrulls storylines, the Galactic Storm storyline, Annihilation, and this is...
The Kree Skrull War, most memorably in my mind, yes.
A huge story engine for the Marvel Universe, the Kree Empire. Oh, I didn't mention the entire Captain Marvel comic book and all of its various incarnations over the years, Ms. Marvel, everything.
So when you talked about TV shows in the Kree, they did show up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Had they shown up elsewhere on TV yet at this point?
Well, the Inhumans are tied to the Kree, and
okay, sorry.
I was thinking of the Secret Invasion TV show, which was not directly tied to the Kree, but was fallout of a previous Kree Skrull War. So this is an amazing issue. The Century Sinister, powerfully produced by the proudest names in all of comicdom, Stan the Manly and Jack King Kirby, invincibly inked by jovial Joe Sinnott, lethargically lettered by adorable Artie Simek. We begin with a wonderful splash page where this is a gag they've done before, but they've taken it to a level they've never taken before, where Reed is making poor Ben hold up the world's hugest piece of Kirby machinery that looks awesome, while Reed is fighting with his wife. And she's like, oh, you've got Ben carrying those things around instead of paying attention to me. And he's like, I'm sorry, honey, I should be paying attention to you. Let's ignore Ben holding up this giant piece of machinery. And then Ben is like, that sinks it. It's bad enough when you make a human derrick out of me, but if I got to stand and listen to yicky mush any longer, forget it. So then Reed finally apologizes. Now, as long-term listeners of this podcast know, I'm never a big fan of huge coincidences, and this issue turns on a huge coincidence. And sometimes I am fickle. Sometimes I forgive the huge coincidences, and sometimes I don't. I can't really forgive the big one in this issue. We cut to a random island in the middle of the Pacific, and 2 archaeologists are exploring it. They open up a giant alien cavern underneath the island that somehow they knew would be here or suspected they would be here. They've got a lost idol that has a cube in its hand that can open it. Inside, they find, unfortunately, a giant robot called the Sentry, Intergalactic Sentry number 459, who freezes them in what looks like sort of like a block of ice, but I think it's more like a block of diamond or something.
In a shimmering mass of colloidal atoms, which is misspelled. It's supposed to be colloidal, if I'm not mistaken. Because I looked that up. I'm like, colloidal? And no, but colloidal atoms, it's basically solid things suspended in a solution of some sort. So it's some kind of heavy, I don't know what it is. One way or the other, it's fun techno speak.
But then we get to the massive coincidence in this issue where Reed, Sue, and Ben have now decided to go on vacation. And where are they going to go on vacation? Well, they're going to pick a random island in the Pacific. How are they going to pick it? They're going to have Ben put on a blindfold and throw a dart at a map of the Pacific. And wherever it lands, that is where they will go.
It's a map of the world. It could have been in Siberia. It could have been, we're going to New York. Hey, we're already in New York. It could have been, any number of things. But no, it's or it could have just been in the middle of the ocean.
True. There's, in fact, a 70% chance that it would land in the middle of the ocean because
precisely
70% of the Earth is covered in water. But amazingly, it picks out an island in the middle of the Pacific, and they decide to go there. They invite Triton and Crystal and Johnny along, but they all say, nope, we're not going, we're going to do other stuff. And so then they take off. Well, it turns out, coincidence of coincidences, this is the same island where these explorers have just awakened the Sentry Sinister. Reed and Sue and Ben show up there and quickly get attacked. And they get in a big fight with the Sentry Sinister. I like the Sentry Sinister. I think that his design is not quite as good as some of the giant robots we've seen recently. It's memorable and it's shown up in other things. It was well used on the Avengers vs. Mightiest Heroes TV show, but it's not one of Kirby's all-time great giant robot designs. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if you're going to believe some of the stuff that is said about where Kirby was in his career and his thought process, he at this point was deliberately kind of holding back his best ideas at this point.
Yeah.
With the idea that he wasn't getting compensated well enough for them. So yeah, I mean, it's a good, decent Kirby robot villain.
Yes. So then the Sentry Sinister fights them on the beaches, as Churchill would say, and they get into a big, huge fight on the beach. Eventually, they are able to call Johnny and Crystal to come help them. They're like, oh, how do we get there? Oh, right, Lockjaw can get us there. They're being very inconsistent about how useful Lockjaw is in terms of getting people around to various places. Johnny and Lockjaw show up. Johnny is trying to fry the robot, not having much better chance than anyone else. But then finally, they accidentally sort of blow up the power supply under the ground, find, thankfully, the archaeologists just in time, free them, and they all get out of there. The Sentry is seemingly destroyed along with his island, but he says, I have not seen nor heard from the Kree for untold ages. Perhaps the supreme race is long since dead, or perhaps they're just departed to return again someday. This is Sentry 459 making his final report. Outpost 10 will soon be destroyed, but I remain at my post as a sentry must. Until the end. Next, the mystery of Alicia. For the most part, we've talked about how Fantastic Four comics have had less pathos than they had a year ago, but they're trying to wring a little bit of pathos out of this, poor Sentry who's been stranded at his post and doesn't know if his race even exists anymore. And it's okay. This is a pretty good issue. It obviously is huge for introducing the Kree. It looks like this may be the last we ever hear of the Kree, but it turns out they're not dead, and they show up next issue to avenge the destruction of their Sentry. And we meet Ronan the Accuser for the first time, who will go on to have a huge history in Marvel Comics and in the MCU. Steve, what do you think about this issue?
Yeah, I really liked it. I'll just have a few little comments on some individual story points as we go through. So Reed decided to go on this vacation because not only had he ticked off Thing for, just using him as a human Derek, but also because he had been more or less ignoring his relatively still new spouse. So the three of them are going. And so Sue says, I just spoke with Johnny. He and Crystal would prefer to remain in New York. They really haven't had a chance to be alone since they found each other again. So it'll be like, hey, Crystal, want to come over? My parents aren't home. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. That sounds good. Kind of reminds me of that time when I was just first dating Amy and she was visiting during Christmas break. And mom and dad at one point came into the TV room and they said, well, we're going to bed. We had a fire in the living room if you two, want to enjoy the fire. And I'm just sort of like, are my parents trying to get me laid? All right. So apparently the Kree can see color outside of the spectrum that is visible to us, presumably infrared, but that is maintained at one point. When the Pogo plane is crash landing on the island because of the security stuff the Sentry had put up, Reed pushes Ben out of the pilot's chair and says, let me have the controls, Ben. It's like, Ben is the one who's the ace pilot. What are you doing? Yeah. And then in the next panel, he says, prepare for crash landing. And the Thing is holding on to Sue in what looks like Kirby was almost intending to be a funny thing, like, oh, the Thing is the one who's scared. But the dialogue says, oh, I'll cushion Susie. It's like, once again, let the test pilot, or how later they're going to retcon him to be a test pilot. But, let the flying ace handle the rough landing, and you're stretchy. You can protect her better. You can be like a big airbag. This makes no sense. At one point, Mr. Fantastic refers to his name, Mr. Fantastic, when the headline writers from Coast to Coast pinned that name on me. It's like, no, they didn't. we saw you name yourself that. Literally right after you crashed, before anybody on Earth knew what was going on.
Yes, I believe the line was, the Thing said, and I guess I'm just a monster now. I'm just a thing. And he says, yes, and I'll name myself Mr. Fantastic. And it's like, I don't think he was saying he was a thing as a way of like, hey, I've come up with a good code name for myself. I think he was talking about how his life had been ruined and it wasn't the appropriate time for you to go like, yes, and I'm fantastic.
Yeah. And I like how Johnny basically does the high-tech Fantastic Four equivalent of taking the phone off the hook when he says, so I guess we can break contact for a while, huh? As he turns off the communication screen. Crystal's like, do you realize, Johnny, this is the first time in all those long months since we met that we have been alone? He says, as a matter of fact, that thought did kind of cross my mind. But of course, then danger calls at that point. I do notice that Sue is able to turn Reed and Ben invisible and cover them in a force field at the same time, which I don't know if she's done that combination of things before.
Yeah, that seems new.
Yeah, it does. They don't make a big deal of it, but, just presumably she's just getting better at using her powers. When the Sentry triggers the tidal wave that's supposed to come and destroy our heroes, he does it by slamming the ground. And remember when I was saying, oh, there's this visual shorthand that Dan Adkins seems to be using to indicate a shockwave. Or was it Dan Adkins or was it the issue before? And it was actually, no, I think it was Werner Roth, the issue before. We see that here on page 16 to indicate the shockwave that's causing the tidal wave. Yeah, overall, a good issue. I really like the sort of gag in the front that really does. I mean, that was a sort of classic ongoing thing in the 80s when we were reading stuff. Reed just having Thing haul everything around and just barely acknowledging what he's doing and getting distracted. And I really like the Johnny and Crystal stuff in here as well.
Yeah, a couple more points. So, you say that this was Kirby holding his best stuff back, but Kirby's last great epic at Marvel was the Eternals, and Eternals #1, a lot like this issue, begins very similarly. Kirby obviously thought a lot of this book in that later when he got to finally come up with a big Marvel epic that he would write and pencil, he would sort of start over again from where this book began and spin a whole big epic out of that. I just say it's interesting that in this book, women wear a lot of clothes. Sue, Crystal, and Medusa are all clothed from, at the very least, neck down. They keep every inch of their body covered in cloth. I find that interesting. You associate comic books with showing a lot of skin. I do note that the Sentry at one point says Wonder of Wonders, which of course reminds us that Fiddler on the Roof was on Broadway at this point. And we can picture Sentry just breaking into a complete round of all the songs from Fiddler on the Roof.
I'm not familiar enough with Fiddler on the Roof, except for If I Were a Rich Man. So I would not have caught that.
I recently rewatched Fiddler on the Roof, and it is one of the best movies ever made. I love that movie. And yes, I was going to point out that he falsely claims the newspapers named him Mr. Fantastic. Okay, that's it for this issue. Steve, why don't you move on to Daredevil number 30?
I will do my best to dispense with this as quickly as possible.
Yes.
Issue number 30, here comes Daredevil, the Man Without Fear, guest starring the mighty Thor. We see that in addition to Thor, we've also got the Cobra and Mr. Hyde.
Oh boy.
This is in addition to the silliness, I just don't feel, look at this cover.
Yeah.
Look at the circle in which the Mjolnir is swinging. It just didn't care. Nope. There's just not much going on. So the setup for this issue is really pretty forced and dumb. Foggy is reading the papers, reading about these robberies, and part of the whole thing about the robberies is, it's like the robber was able to get into this very hard to access place, but then things were destroyed from the inside. And it's like, like maybe the Cobra could get inside and then Mr. Hyde could bust out. Like, that doesn't explain things. How does that?
If the Cobra was taking Mr. Hyde's serum, then it would work. He could slither in and then become Mr. Hyde and bust out. But otherwise, it makes no sense. You should point out that this is, if there should be a Thunder God, Hang Loose, Hallowed One, Smilin' Stanley, and Genial Gene Colan have come up with another blockbuster, aided and abetted by, unfortunately, John Tartaglione, inker, and Artie Simek, letterer. Once again, yes. Tartaglione not doing as good a job as Giacoya was doing on this book.
Yes. Mr. Hyde and Cobra are on a crime spree, and Daredevil decides, you know what? I want to go after Cobra and Mr. Hyde. And Cobra and Mr. Hyde, usually, for no good reason whatsoever, are fighting Thor. So, therefore, I'm going to disguise myself as Thor. So, we're in a situation where he is Matt Murdock, playing Mike Murdock, playing Daredevil, playing Thor. And from how we see things going in here, it looks like he's actually wearing the Mike Murdock glasses underneath it all, and then has a Daredevil mask on, and then has a Thor mask on over that.
I would like to believe he has the Matt Murdock glasses on first, and then the Mike Murdock glasses on over the Matt Murdock glasses, and then the Daredevil costume on over that, and then the Thor costume on over that. That's what I would like to believe.
Those Mike Murdock glasses could probably accommodate the Matt Murdock glasses underneath them. So anyway, he figures out sort of how to look like he's flying by holding his billy club next to the costume Mjolnir and shooting his cable out. But if you look at the final panel on page 6, Colin can't even figure out how to make this work visually in comic book logic. Anyway, he swings / flies over to his own offices for no good reason. I do note that on the bottom of page 7, the panel on the bottom left, those file cabinet drawers are once again always, I think they've got a busted file cabinet drawer. And it just always looks like it's about to tumble onto the ground. That angle doesn't work. Anyway, for no good reason, he shows up as Thor, takes off the Thor mask and shows, hey, it's me, Mike Murdock, with my ridiculous wraparound sunglasses. And he says, my biggest problem will be keeping all these identities straight. It's like, yes, they will. And then Foggy, now that Thor / Daredevil / Mike Murdock / Matt Murdock is here, says, Mike Murdock in the identity of Daredevil, disguised as Thor, in order to trap 2 other loons. How can anyone tell who's who anymore? It's like, yeah, exactly. And actually, we see that busted file drawer again on the bottom of page 8. How? It really is like Colin just decided that this was a busted file drawer they have in their office. And he once again refers to Foggy as Tubby for no apparent reason.
He's an asshole.
Yes.
Am I not allowed to say that word? Because he's a jerk.
No, I think that's probably allowed. So Thor, we'll decide retroactively if we need to bleep it. So Thor hears that Thor is going about town and decides to come out and deal with Thor. And they get into a big, huge fight, which makes no sense because Daredevil is just an acrobatic dude and Thor is literally a demigod. Thor comes up with a storm wind so strong that it actually rips the Thor costume off of him. Doesn't rip the Daredevil costume off of him for some reason, but rips the Thor costume off of him. Oh, and they did mention earlier that there are actually plastic arm sleeves on this thing to make his arms look bigger. Kind of like the modern costumes, I guess, that sort of have the muscles sculpted on them. Yeah. Anyway, so they continue being in a big fight. After a while, Thor is like, oh, okay, yeah, well, you seem to be doing a good job, even though I defeated you. I'll go ahead and let you take my villains here. Good. They shouldn't be Thor's villains in the first place. Just don't dress up as me again. Like, okay. Well, coincidence of coincidences. At this very moment, that's when Cobra and Mr. Hyde show up. You know, it's not even really explained why. I guess they're just like, we're after Thor, but you're just doing a crime spree. I don't know. I don't care. And Mr. Hyde, Colin is drawing him like the Wolfman, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's never been a thing before. It's, I don't know. Anyway, so Daredevil fights Cobra and Hyde. At one point, Cobra gets on Daredevil's back, and Daredevil is thinking he can wrap himself around a victim just like his namesake. I think that's a python, dude. That's not a cobra, but, you know, okay, sure, fine, whatever. So instead of finishing Daredevil off, of course, they never finish the good guy off. They're like, I've got a better idea. So Mr. Hyde lures Daredevil back to whatever suburban house he has as a lair, where he's come up with a new formula that is going to blind Daredevil. So, of course, you're like, oh, okay, this has been done before. Daredevil's already blind, so it's not going to do anything to him. But somehow it actually neutralizes his radar sense in the last panel. So now, to all intents and purposes, Daredevil is really and truly blind. So, okay, as dumb as this issue is, I'm intrigued by the setup for next issue.
Yeah, it's pretty silly. The whole thing's pretty silly that they would set out to blind Daredevil and somehow successfully blind Daredevil, not knowing he was blind. This whole issue is very silly. The question we end up asking every month is, why is Stan still writing this book? Why hasn't he handed it off to Roy? Stan clearly just loves writing this daffy, silly, bizarre book. And I just don't know why. At the beginning, they're going like, why are you interested in supervillains, Matt? They have nothing to do with us. It's like, except for your twin brother is Daredevil. So that alone gives you somewhat of an interest in this, like,
right. Yeah.
And that twin brother, by the way, is here every day, just hanging out and calling me Tubby.
And we've never seen them in the same room at the same time.
Yes, we've never seen either the two brothers with each other or either one with Daredevil at the same time. I guess they wouldn't expect to see Mike and Daredevil at the same time because they wrongly assume they're the same person. So, or are they? Here I am talking as if Matt and Mike are different people. I've been infected with the looniness at this point. I'm not a big fan of Cohen and Tartaglioni's Matt or Mike or Foggy or Thor or Daredevil, but I kind of like the werewolfish Mr. Hyde. I think their Cobra and Mr. Hyde are threatening. I'm scared of them. Protect me.
Okay. So, the last couple things I saw I had notes on that I didn't think of. At one point when Dr. Blake is turning himself into Thor, he thinks to himself, in all the universe, there's only one true thunder god. It's like, no, there's not. And you know it. You have met Zeus.
Yeah.
Come on.
It's true.
It's another thunder god. At one point, they misspell Mjolnir again. They call it Mjolnar. At one point, Daredevil as Thor ends up crashing through the window of a skyscraper, and you see the huge, sharp shards of glass that are going everywhere. I'm guessing that the plastic sleeves he was wearing must have protected him from all the cuts.
I would hope so.
I would hope so. Yes.
Speaking of Thor, let's move on to his own book, The Mighty Thor, number 142. From the edge of infinity, he comes, possessing all the blockbusting powers of the Fantastic Four, the scourge of the Super Skrull. So, unfortunately, we are still not fighting as Guardians, which is what I want us to fight all the time. We're finally going to get back to that next issue. But in the meantime, it's Thor versus Super Skrull. I think we briefly saw Thor fight the Super Skrull in Fantastic Four Annual number 3. They finally get an issue where they do a knockdown, drag-out fight. It's not the worst idea. The Super Skrull is a very powerful villain. He is a good match for Thor. The Scourge of the Super Skrull, a modern, majestic masterwork by Stan the Man Lee and Jack King Kirby, embellished by Vince Gilletto, lettered by Artie Simek. We have a very funny beginning where Thor is just hanging out on the street when suddenly a guy on a motorcycle is like, well, if it ain't the so-called Thunder God, how about a race, Curly? I bet I can run rings around you if I ever let this baby open up. And Thor's like, oh, you want to get in a race with me, do you? Okay, well, let's find a better place to do the race. Let me hop on your motorcycle and start swinging my hammer and take us rocketing all around the sky in town. And the guy's like, please just let me down. I want to get down. And he's like, oh, okay. Didn't you want to have a race? Come on, buddy. Didn't you want to have a race? Didn't you call me Curly? Didn't you want to have a race with me? And the guy's like, no, get away from me. This is terrifying, which is quite funny. Meanwhile, we get Loki still trapped in a distant planet, still reaching out with his mind to get other villains to attack Thor, as we've seen him do before. This time, he finds the Super Skrull, who seemingly was banished from returning to the Skrull Empire, and so is just sort of tooling around in his ship, I guess, looking for odd jobs or whatever he's doing.
I think it says that basically this is like their equivalent of being assigned to KP, as they called it back in World War II, that he's just been put on patrol out in like some not busy part of space, essentially been given a job that is make work just to demote him.
Yeah, I think KP stood for Kitchen Patrol, right? Like,
yes,
yes.
Peeling potatoes, yes.
Peeling potatoes. So then he contacts the Super Skrull, whispers in his ear, and says, you should go fight Thor, which the Super Skrull then does. Unfortunately, you'll recall that the ugliest the Fantastic Four book ever looked was when Vince Gilletto was inking it. And indeed, we get absolutely terrible art when the Super Skrull becomes Johnny Torch. When he becomes the Human Torch, he looks absolutely terrible. Gilletto just doesn't know how to ink the Human Torch. It looks absolutely awful on page 6, and even worse on page 7. Third panel on page 7 is, Kirby drew this, right? Like, Kirby would know how to draw this, but when Gilletto is at its worst, he makes it look like Kirby is a terrible penciler. And third panel of page 7 looks like it was penciled by a terrible penciler. Mm-hmm. Thor fights Super Skrull for several pages. First, he is in Johnny Torch mode. Then he's in Thing mode. He is switching back and forth. Meanwhile, wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, we cut to Asgard. Oh, I've missed it. Balder is being sent on a mission by Odin. He is going to go ahead and take Sif with him. It's sort of implied that maybe they might be attracted to each other, which would create a love triangle. But that's the last we'll see of them for this issue. We cut back to Super Skrull and Thor wailing on each other for several pages. Finally, Thor is like, oh, right, I'm God of Thunder. I can cause a big rainstorm, which is going to douse you from being in your Human Torch aspect. Finally, at the end, he says, wait a second. I know the best way to defeat you. By the power of my Uru Mallet, I do create an anti-force. Be gone then, Super Skrull. And apparently he has the ability that he has never used before to just eject people off the planet Earth, to hit them with an anti-force that will send them rocketing up into space, into their spaceship. And as soon as the Silver Skrull gets in his spaceship, it's unclear if he then goes ahead and sits at the controls and decides to flee and go off into the night sky, or if he's literally just been rocketed into his ship with such force that he has bounced it off into space. And then Loki is still stuck on the other planet, feeling bad that his plan didn't work. Next, thou must not miss the Enchanters. Before we move on to Tales of Asgard, did you have any thoughts on this issue, Steve?
Not that much. I mean, yes, fighting Super Skrull is certainly better than him fighting Cobra and Mr. Hyde or regular garden variety mobsters. So I'll take this. Yeah, it's better when he's doing Asgardian stuff, but this is a okay for a change of pace every now and then. The only other thing that I had to say in this one is on page 8, panel 3, I really cannot tell what the Super Skrull is lifting up there to throw at Thor. And I don't think Stan Lee could figure it out either. Because at one point he says, he doth lift the very wall from yonder roof.
Yeah, I can't figure it out.
What?
Yeah.
Anyway, that just caught my eye. That's it. I think you've covered it well enough.
Yeah, I'll add that one thing that happens sometimes, especially in Thor comics, it feels like on page 15, suddenly the Super Skrull is like, oh no, the tide of battle has turned against me. I've been defeated. And I'm like, no, it didn't. I'm not seeing any way this tide. It seems like this is still a pretty evenly matched battle to me. Like Thor suddenly squeezed your head between his thighs, and I realize that's unpleasant, but I don't see that as turning the tide of the battle. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the back to Tales of Asgard. Tales of Asgard, we who are about to die. Face it, faithful ones, Stan the Manly and Jack King Kirby have done it again, aided by Vince Coletta, letterer, and Artie Simek, inker. We cut to...
or the other way around, but that's
I'm sorry. What did I say? Vince Coletta, inker, Artie Simek, letterer.
Yeah.
I was reading it directly off the page. It's odd I would mix that up. Now, Kirby and Lee seem to have forgotten that the mountain that Thor is in was an underground mountain, because now it's an overground mountain.
I noticed that.
That is erupting like a volcano. It was originally a flat, sort of crystalline plain that had a secret mountain underneath it. And now it is a big mountain in the sky with lava coming out of it. So it's not just a mountain, it's a volcano. As Alibar and his horde of Satan's 40 horsemen coming along behind him are seemingly setting off volcanoes as they go. Very little happens in this story. Mogul decides to get in on the action himself and goes off on a sort of sci-fi flying carpet. Finally, we get what was already pretty much happening at the end of last issue. Thor and the Warriors 3. Unfortunately, Volstagg not to be seen. Presumably he's just off panel. And they are finally about to face Alibar and his 40 death demons. This is a very inconsequential filler episode of Tales of Asgard, but still, it's fun. It's fun to see a big volcano going off. It's fun to see the sci-fi flying carpet. Looking forward to the exciting goings-on next issue. What do you think of this story?
I mostly agree with you about this one being largely filler, but they do make it more clear in this one that essentially Mogul knows that he is going to be defeated and is just looking to take everybody down with him. Okay, if I'm going to be defeated, everyone's going to die, including me, to the point where he is going to use a bioweapon. He has a flask of some sort of plague that he is going to release. And the servant who brought it to him, Sulebeg, Mogul says, oh, well, basically, I'm so cruel and capricious a ruler that I'm going to test it on you first. And then he's abjectly begging for his life. At which point, Mogul decides that he wasn't worthy of testing it on if he's going to beg for his life. And I also noticed that Mogul actually sort of calls out that this is a flying carpet. He's like, men will speak of it in hushed whispers around countless campfires in countless lands. And in their immortal ignorance when seeking to describe this craft I ride, they shall call it a flying carpet. Thus shall it be known throughout the endless ages. Although Kirby has already shown us a type of vehicle which was implied was the source of the idea of flying carpets when we saw Prester John and the stories of his travels.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to Tales of Suspense number 91.
All right, Tales of Suspense number 91 with Iron Man and Captain America. Okay, so we have an Iron Man cover. We see another sort of giant, ugly-looking humanoid who is fighting Shellhead. Looks kind of like the geek. No, not the geek.
The freak. The freak.
The freak. Freaks and geeks. He looks kind of like the freak. He looks kind of like Ultimo. Gene Colan seems to have a thing in this book with those sorts of things. Yeah. It says the uncanny challenge of the monstrous Crusher. Now, I was trying to remember. I thought, hadn't we had a bad guy called the Crusher before? But no, I think I was thinking of Crusher Hogan in Spider-Man's origin.
Well, so the Absorbing Man's real name was Crusher Creel.
Oh, Crusher Creel.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so Smilin' Stan Lee and Genial Gene Colan created this neoclassic just for you, Tiger, so enjoy. Inked by Frank Giacoia, lettered by Sam Rosen. Tony Stark is working on some kind of centrifuge machine, and it looks just like, what's that Bond movie where Bond is put in that centrifuge chair? Moonraker, which was, of course, not yet a movie, and the book was not at all like the movie, so this was not taken from that. But this is, I'm sure, stuff that was coming out of NASA PR from their research. On what essentially looks like it's supposed to be Cuba, but some southern island with a dictator, a scientist who is very loyal to the dictator has come up with a formula that is going to be the greatest weapon for his people. He brings it to the dictator, who does have a big beard and, dresses in green fatigues, brings him this formula and says, here, drink this and you will be master of the world. And the dictator isn't having it. He's like, no, you drink it first. The guy's like, well, that's not okay, I guess I will. And he takes it and he turns into this walking engine of destruction. At which point the dictator is like, oh, okay, we can't have that. I'm going to try to kill you, which doesn't work because he is now super strong and rather impervious. The dictator is like, oh, okay, I tell you what, why don't you go off and destroy Tony Stark for me? Iron Man. Whatever. I'm sure everyone knows who that is. Yeah. Tony Stark, Iron Man, somebody, I don't know. Oddly enough, the Crusher then says yes, and he takes the assignment, planning to come back and then kill the dictator at that point. Like, what? Why? Why are you doing the first part first? Why aren't you just doing the second part? The Crusher shows up at Tony Stark's labs. Tony Stark happens to be dressed up as Iron Man at the time. They get into a big old fight. And there's really not much to say about the fight overall, but in the end, Iron Man uses some kind of gadget that he has made as part of his centrifuge research that is able to create something like centrifugal force on a thing or person just standing there, which, basically this is like a gravity enhancing machine. I don't see how this is centrifugal force. As a matter of fact, I have been told that supposedly by smarty pants people that centrifugal force is not a thing, that it's just an illusion, that what is actually real is centripetal force, which is, anyway, one way or the other, doesn't matter. Iron Man then uses this thing on him to make him heavy enough that he falls through the steel floor and into the crust of the earth, and then he seals up the hole. So it's like, I didn't think that superheroes at this day and age were supposed to just literally kill people. Nope. That didn't really happen, I don't think, or at least not this explicitly, but they make it pretty darn clear that Iron Man's like, well, you made me do it. I'm going to go ahead and bury you alive in the earth. Kind of horrifying. So that's it. What thoughts do you have on this story?
You left out pretty huge plot turn, one of the hugest plot turns in Iron Man history.
You're right, I did. Happy and Pepper in the last page show up out of nowhere, and they're announcing that the reason they haven't been seen or heard from in a little while, as Tony was complaining about earlier in the issue, is because they eloped and they have gone off, gotten married, presumably had their little impromptu honeymoon. Tony's like, oh, I'm very happy for you both. And this seems to wrap up the whole Pepper Potts as love interest part of the story that's been going on for the last 5 or more years.
Yeah, it's huge. And this whole storyline is wrapped up in, I guess, 3 panels here on page 12, which seems odd to me. Like, I think they could have gotten an issue out of Tony's feelings about this. Tony just sort of like accepts it and then goes back to sealing up his enemy in the floor. And this is huge. When they wrote Jane out of Thor, they got a whole issue out of it. That was a very good issue. And they could have tried to get a whole issue out of writing Pepper out of this book. I thought that was very strange. I will point out that we do have Giacola on Colin here, and he does a much better job than Tartaglione does. I think this is a really nicely inked book.
By the way, it's Giacoya. You said Giacola, as in sort of like mashing Giacoya and Colin's names together, which I kind of like. Okay. We'll refer to this art team from now on as Giacola.
Giacola.
Or Giacolin. There you go.
Giacolin. Got to have their ship name. I really like the panel on page 3 where you've got the goons holding the scientist at gunpoint, but it's framed against a huge woolly mammoth skeleton in the foreground, just like Cohen thinking, okay, this is like a natural history museum. What do they have in natural history museums? They have mammoth skeletons. I don't know if this would have actually been dug up on the island of Cuba. I'm not sure how many woolly mammoths were on Cuba back in the day, but apparently they were, because they have a giant skeleton in their natural history museum where the scientist is working.
Well, and why would they have it on display in the same room where they have their labs?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Colin is just kind of bored with what he's been given to draw over this month, and is just looking for anything to make things more interesting.
Now, this is the second issue in a row where we've had the line, wait, try it on yourself first. Where I'm like, okay, we're kind of stuck in that rut for a little bit. That's my last note on this issue. We can go ahead and move on to Captain America.
Let's please do. Okay, so Captain America starts out with an allegorical page here, more or less, with Captain America looking like he is in anguish as there are floating heads all around him saying, traitor, 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 traitor. So the last defeat, a praiseworthy presentation painstakingly produced by Stan the Man Lee and Gil Sugarlips Kane, inked by Joe Sinnott, lettered by Al Kurzrock. I've never heard of that letterer before, and I don't think he is as good as Artie Simek or Sam Rosen, but that's fine. A letterer that's a little bit less good than your other two main letterers is not going to do really anything to a book. I do notice that we have not really seen the Kane nose before this, but on page 1, that one head that seems to be looking right up Captain America's butt there. Yeah. We see a little bit of the famous Kane upturned nose. Kane was also a huge fan of the floating heads, although he isn't the only one, but he is one of its main practitioners, along with Steve Ditko. Mm-hmm. So last issue, Red Skull had Captain America completely over a barrel. And so he's like, oh, I can get anything out of Captain America right now. So now you must serve me for 24 hours. And he pointed out, it's like, he clearly would have said yes to anything because you were about to destroy like the whole center of Manhattan. Why 24 hours? Well, at this point, the storytellers here have decided, well, 24 hours was even too much for us. So we're just going to skip forward to like 23 hours and 45 minutes into this thing.
I've read these before, but I hadn't read these in a while. And this is exactly what I predicted would happen last issue. What if after 23 hours and 30 minutes, he suddenly asked for one more evil thing to be done? And Captain America's like, all right, well, you got 30 minutes of me being evil, but after that, I'm off the clock. And indeed, that's exactly what happens in this issue. We have no idea what Captain America did for his first 23 hours of being evil. It was enough to get the whole world to denounce him as a traitor, so it's presumably bad. But we never find out what it is. We just see Red Skull, as I predicted, going like, wait, one last thing. I still got you for half an hour. Wait, let me go ahead and find out the location of the submarine.
It seems almost like he was just like, no, I'm going to let you worry about it for 23 hours. And that they've been up for 23 hours at this point. It's not like Red Skull's like, okay, well, here's your bunk. sink's over there. I left some towels for you in the bathroom. It makes very little sense. But the Red Skull at this point is saying, give me the location of America's newest nuclear sub. Captain America, like, how would I know? He's like, well, apparently the Avengers get, regular classified military briefings, which sort of makes the whole, hey, Black Widow's going to join thing seem even more suspect. So Captain America gives him the correct, actual, true location because he's so honorable that he said he would be his servant for 24 hours. And so I guess I will tell you where our greatest weapon is, at which point Red Skull is going to kill him with a heat beam of some sort. Anyway, one way or the other, Captain America escapes, breaks another window on this ship to jump into the ocean. When they get over the submarine, Red Skull has some kind of a hypno device that he is going to use to make the sailors, shoot their nuclear weapons, presumably at the West. Captain America, well, fortunately, the sub surfaces rather than Captain America having to try to get his way into the sub while it's underwater, which they often do in these books. And it's always like, how did that happen? Something happened in the gutters there. But at this point, Captain America is able to make his way in. All the soldiers are hypnotized. He's having to fight them. I notice on page 7, that first panel at the top where Captain America is sort of doing like what looks like jumping jacks there, and all the sailors are flying from him. That looks like kind of a Sal Buscema type panel, if I in the way that I think of these things. But anyway, Captain America is able to do something with the nuclear sub's nuclear engine, something reverse the hypnosis. Right? Yeah. Waves hands, hypnosis done. But then Captain America convinces all of them to act like they're still hypnotized. And the Red Skull brings his ship there to let them load themselves all off onto the Red Skull's ship. Why, if the Red Skull thought they were all hypnotized, didn't he have them all just jump into the sea? Who cares? So the Red Skull is left alone in this sub to go and wreak havoc. But then it turns out that, no, this was just an experimental sub, and this was a prototype for the new sub. And so it was scheduled to be destroyed. And so Captain America had just gotten them to move up the self-destruct sequence to now. So it goes off, and the Red Skull is supposedly killed inside. I will point out that these days we would refer to this as a dirty bomb. Not a bomb that is a nuclear reaction, but a bomb that spreads nuclear waste all over the place. That's what this would be. And it looks kind of like a mushroom cloud in the second to last panel of the story. And then in the final panel, Captain America says, I'm no more a hero than any man who fights for justice and freedom and brotherhood. So long as we cherish liberty, so long as the bitter weed of tyranny can never take root upon our shores, then all of us are heroes, and the dream which is America will long endure. And that was a tough sentence to read.
Yeah, it was really depressing.
The only other thing I'll point out is at one point when he is fighting the soldiers, the sailors. Anyone who's Navy or ex-Navy, I did not mean to insult you by calling them soldiers. And anyone who is Army, I did not mean to insult you by apologizing for calling the sailor soldier. So page 7, panel 2, so right after that panel that I called out for looking like a Sal Buscema panel, Captain America is leaping over the group of sailors, and he literally has his hand on the face of one of the sailors as he is leaping over them. So I just find that to be funny and a little bit humorously humiliating for whoever that sailor happens to be.
Yeah.
A decent Red Skull story, even though there's, it's pretty silly. Yeah, I could have done without this one for the most part.
Oh, I don't know. I liked it. If it just hadn't been 24 hours, if it had been just some instant thing where it's like, I will destroy New York unless you tell me where the submarine is, that would have been fine.
Yes.
If you just take out this silly element of, I'm going to have you be a traitor for 24 hours, and we don't even know what he does during those 24 hours to convince the world he's a traitor. And then at the very end, he's like, tell me about the submarine. But once it gets down to, tell me about the submarine, and then, you've got the hypno ray in the submarine, and I really like Kane's submarine. I generally like Kane Tech. Mm-hmm. We talked about it a little bit before in terms of his comic strip Space Hawks, but I also just recently reread the complete run of Bill Mantlo on Micronauts, and people forget that Gil Kane was the artist on Bill Mantlo's Micronauts for about 6 issues, with Danny Blandy inking him, which was a really fascinating combo. There's lots of good Kane Tech in that. I like Kane Tech.
Yeah, and the Red Skull's ship in here is unique, and I really like it.
Yeah, I like it a lot. I thought it was a little confusing on the ship where it's like Cap gets on the ship. It's like, these sailors have been hypnotized, so they all want to attack me and kill me. Oh, wait, now I found a way to unhypnotize them. And they still all want to attack me and kill me because they all think I've turned traitor.
Oh, right.
It's like, boy, you can't win for losing here, buddy. You got it going and coming. I like this issue. I like the Kane Tech. I like everything except for if you just take out all references to 24 hours. I think this is a good story.
Yeah.
And I'll just say at the end that Kane Sinnott continues to be a fascinating combo. The sort of more, rounded, softer look of Sinnott over the harsher, jaggeder look of jaggedier look of Gil Sugarlips Kane. I continue to find absolutely fascinating. And Sinnott sort of making the Kane Tech more rounded. That was fascinating. Anyway, let's go and move on to our final book of the month, Avengers number 42, The Plan and the Power. And in this corner, Hercules versus the deadly dynamic Dragon Man. We have on the cover, the Avengers are fighting Diablo, and then we just see the floating heads of Hercules and Dragon Man in the corner. We open the issue, The Plan and the Power.
Well, we also see that, the Goliath is clearly fighting the Avengers.
True. So then we get inside the issue and it says The Plan and the Power. Stan Lee edits and otherwise embellishes a Roy Thomas, John Buscema climactic culmination of cooperative creativity. We don't give them enough credit for coming up. Presumably this is Stan coming up with these credit boxes, and they're always fun. They're always different. Like, he's never used this one before. He's never said a climactic culmination of cooperative creativity before. He's always coming up with new ones. It's very impressive. Inked by George Bell, unfortunately, lettered by Art Simek, Avengers Assemblers First Class. So we begin, as with every single issue of Roy Thomas Avengers, with the Avengers sitting around in their headquarters fighting each other. It's sort of funny. We see Hercules kicking backs and eating grapes the way we associate with ancient Greeks, sort of dropping them into his mouth. They are still fighting. They all know that this is really about Black Widow, as always, and that's why Hawkeye is being so testy. It's always nice in Marvel Comics when they're like, hey, we have to fight somebody, because they're so worried that last they saw Dragon Man was flying off with Goliath and Wasp. And they do at least go like, the Fantastic Four know how to fight Diablo and Dragon Man. Let's go and call them up. And the Fantastic Four are like, oh, sorry, we can't help. Or I guess they do offer to help.
Well,
but then,
yeah, they do offer to help, but then the Avengers are like, nope, it's an Avenger that needs to be rescued, so we will do it. Just tell us where Diablo's base of operations is.
Yeah. So then says, and now we must shift our attention to a certain mountaintop in Transylvania, rebuilt, may we add, by the Transylvanian Castle Construction Union, local number 825, Stan, the working man's friend.
2 observations about that. Well, 3 observations about that panel. 1, that is a beautiful looking castle that was rendered there. 2, it is at a really bad angle. If you look at the horizon, that thing is falling over. That thing is at like maybe 15, 20 degrees tilted. And the third thing is they always seem to forget that Transylvania at this point was behind the so-called Iron Curtain. So,
yes.
That never seems to come up. It's not like, oh, another commie nation. It's just like, oh, no, Transylvania. It's in Romania, isn't it? Shut up.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we have Goliath and Diablo and Dragon Man all hanging out. Diablo has now created a bunch of copies of Dragon Man. It would have been fun to get them all activated and have a bunch of Dragon Man attacking all at the same time, but we don't see that happen. They never actually come to life. Goliath wants to tear apart Diablo, but Diablo keeps reminding him that he can't do it because the Dragon Man is threatening Wasp. The Avengers arrive at the castle. They have Hercules swing down on a nylon thread as if he's Black Widow, which is a little odd. And they go ahead and send Hercules off to go fight Dragon Man, which is a good use of resources. They go ahead and attack the castle. Goliath still thinks the Wasp is in danger, so he attacks the Avengers. They all pound on each other for a while. Then Hercules runs into Dragon Man, and they have, as promised on the cover, a knockdown drag-out fight, which is a lot of fun. We just briefly see the Black Widow still in China, having been through the Psychotron. She manages to escape, but then I guess gets gassed again, so it was all for naught. The Avengers are still fighting Goliath for a while. Finally, they realize that, what happens here?
Which page are we on?
We're on page 14. Goliath says, Hank, stop, you must listen. He says, if you're going to try to talk me into turning against Diablo, forget it. And then, but then he explains.
That's when they're like, Hercules is taking care of that right now. He's like, oh, well, if Hercules is going ahead and distracting Dragon Man, then all right, now we're good. Let's go join forces.
Yes, he says, I had a plan of my own, Avenger, though it might have meant Jan's death and my own. I had decided to sabotage Diablo's scheme to bring an army of dragon men to life. Okay, so then they go ahead and attack Diablo. They get into a big fight, and then suddenly Captain America shows up. Captain America, who has been helping the Red Skull commit treason for a while, and the whole world had turned against him. Somehow he has managed to, I guess the soldiers on that submarine, once again, sorry folks, sailors on that submarine, must have told the world he's not really a traitor. And he's fine. He's so fine that he is allowed to go behind the Iron Curtain and go to Transylvania. He joins in the fight. I always like comics where suddenly a hero who you didn't think would show up shows up unexpectedly as the cavalry arriving. Finally, downstairs, Hercules seems to finally beat Dragon Man. Hercules has not been spending a lot of time going like, let me make sure I don't crush the Wasp, who was right here just a second ago. But thankfully, she is fine. They decide to blow up the mountain, destroying all the old dragon men. You would think they would just have Diablo go like, oh, he must have been destroyed. But no, they're actually bringing him home to arrest him. They're going to go throw him in jail. They arrive home to find out that, the Black Widow, turns out, never turned traitor. She was working for S.H.I.E.L.D. She is now a prisoner behind the bamboo curtain. And Hawkeye says we have to go rescue her. And that takes us to next issue. I am loving Buscema's art on this book, despite the George Bell inks. I think that Buscema is just doing a wonderful job. Suddenly, even though the stories really haven't changed that much, it seems like a well-written book. The difference between Buscema and Don Heck makes all the difference. Not only Buscema's rendering, but Buscema's storytelling. The storytelling is huge, and Buscema knows how to tell a story visually, and Don Heck did not. I say that. I mean, Don Heck has illustrated some good stories, but maybe, as you frequently said, Steve, not suited for a teen book. For some reason, Don Heck was doing a terrible job with his storytelling on this book, much worse than he had done on other books. This is so much better, this Buscema storytelling.
I was waiting in the wings to say, you know what? John Buscema is just better at a team book.
Yes.
But you did it for me. Overall, I like this issue. George Bell's inking, it's funny, sometimes I kind of like the kind of slapdash look of it, in that it sort of adds a little bit more of a, almost like an energy to things. Like, you're not being at all precious with the art. It's just like, almost like you're an action hero slinging down the ink. But there are points when it just looks like you could have done a little bit more than that, buddy. Overall, I really like this. I will point out just a couple little things. Hercules uses a word I've never heard before. In sooth, I care but little for the glory of closing in combat with the one yclept Dragon Man. YCLEPT.
Okay.
Is that a word you had heard of before?
Nope.
Yeah, I looked it up. It's from Old English. It is an archaic word, but it is a thing. So, okay. Yclept. I now know another word that I didn't know before. Yeah, so there's apparently lava in this mountain. I don't think there's any volcanoes in Transylvania. Romania. But yeah, or Transylvania, Romania, anywhere in that general area of the world. And then at one point, Hercules says, "'Tis like unto the Stygian depths of fiery Hades." Of course, in the Greek and Roman myths, Hades was cold and dark, but perhaps in the Marvel version of that world, it is fiery and hot.
Who knows?
We hear Hercules once again using his exclamation, "By the zestful zither of Zeus!" Although I think last time it may have been zesty, one way or the other. I love that. I need to start using that in my everyday life instead of "holy crap" or something like that. "By the zestful zither of Zeus." So I think that's all I have to say about this. It's good to have John Buscema on, and I can't wait to get another inker who we can see what they can do with him.
Yes, I will point out in the letters that there is once again a letter from Carlos Pacheco, who is seemingly not the Carlos Pacheco that would go on to become a penciler of X-Men. There's also a letter from Gaspar Massana, who I wonder if he would go on to become the comics artist known just as Gaspar, but I don't know. So that was this issue. Steve, I don't know if you realize this. We just got through 5 books in an hour and 8 minutes.
And that's before we edit it. Yes.
That's before we edit it.
I'm very happy with this. I have been slogging through editing, as much as the previous episode was good, it was big. And the longer it goes, the more editing is involved. And I'm going to make sure to keep this as short as I can. I'm going to try to keep this up in the future, too.
Yep. I think we have to. Well, fantastic. All right, Steve, that was all of the books of July 1967. I think this was an excellent month of Marvel Comics. We had Spidey No More. We had the introduction of the Kree. We had some very good work going on in almost all these books. I think that this has been fantastic. Do you have any final thoughts?
Well, we also had the introduction of Kingpin within Spidey No More. So that was also a major thing. Yeah, I think I've said everything I need to say, other than goodbye, everybody. Take care. And as always, stay safe out there.
Yeah, try your best. Thanks, everyone. Bye. We will see you soon.
Take care. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, we now have a Patreon where you can show your appreciation. If you've got a few bucks, head over to patreon.marvelrereadclub.com to support us. Also, you can still rate and review us at your podcatcher of choice, and that would be greatly appreciated as well. You can find us online at marvelrereadclub.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Threads. See you next time.